Hey guys, this is just a little bonus episode that I put together. This episode is basically a discussion me and a listener had. Somebody was a listener of the show was disagreeing with what I said in one of the previous episodes, which was, I believe, debunking intersectionality. And me and this listener were going, back and forth. And I was said, you know what? Just call up. Here's the number of the show. Call up and we could chop it up. And that's what happened. So I hope you guys enjoyed and let me know what you guys think.
So, you said you wanted to have a discussion about the thing that one of the episodes that I uploaded, correct?
Yeah, actually, it was pointed to your podcast and so it was the episode 4 on, particularly on the stuff about intersectionality.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, first of all, I just want to say it's cool that you're doing this podcast. You touch on a lot of important topics, so I appreciate that. And thanks for agreeing to have a conversation with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think particularly about intersectionality, I think from my understanding and experience, I disagree with some of what you said, in that
Well, let's tackle that. What do you disagree with what
well,
I said?
sure. Well, first of all, for me, intersectionality is really basically essential for understanding racism and oppression in society. And I know basically from what I understood from your podcast, you felt that intersectionality was not, was kind of BS. Yeah, it wasn't a good way of looking at things.
Well, yeah, like just let me just clarify. What I think is intersectionality is just another little cute term to use for another word of white supremacy. And there's no, to me, there's no such thing as intersectionality whatsoever, because whenever you do hear people talk about intersectionality or intersectionalism, for some reason, these people have these crazy ideologies that say people of color, men in particularly, men of color, are in positions to oppress other groups of people, especially women of color. And that to me is that's asinine because one, an oppressed group cannot oppress another group. And that's what my main thing is. And my main focus is always white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy. So, what about what I said that intersectionality is BS? What about it do you disagree in?
Let's see. So, I think from my perspective, I appreciate that you focus on race and white supremacy, and that, particularly in the U.S., racial racial oppression, it has a particular place in our society, particularly due to the origins of our country and slavery and other forms of historical racism. Um, at the same time, I feel like there are other forms of oppression based on other people's, other identities that people have. So, for example, I do think that there is sexism and gender oppression. There is oppression based on sexual identity and sexual orientation. There is oppression based on ability or disability. So I think it's important that I think that all these different kinds of oppressions are connected to each other. So in order to really understand how that all works, it's important to have some sort of framework to incorporate all these. And I think for me, intersectionality is a really useful framework.
But for some reason, whenever you find people who are in the levels of intersection, they for some reason never they never either get abused. They use their first thing, which is their white privilege. So you could find a gay white female out here, threatening a black family, selling water, or at a barbecue. You know what I mean? So these to me, all that intersectionality thing just goes out the window. I understand what you're saying, that there's different intersections of oppression, and I'm saying that that's complete BS, because there's only one form of oppression, which is white supremacy. And if there is other form of oppression that it's not white supremacy, that it's because it's gay or it's because it's woman, then please show me some laws that actually, determine some of the oppression based on laws that certain people couldn't go certain places, certain people couldn't do certain things,
Sure. I mean, I think there's different things going on. It's a complicated topic. I think just let's see. One example I would say is like currently sexual orientation, being gay, lesbian, queer is not a protected identity. In other words, people can be fired from their job because of their sexual orientation. I think recently there was the Supreme Court case of, a person saying that, I'm not going to provide a wedding cake for a gay couple. So these are, and the Supreme Court said that, they can discriminate against people for their sexual identity or sexual orientation.
And you're saying what that cake bakery place did is equivalent to the systematic oppression of white supremacy?
I'm not saying that it's equivalent. I think, different forms of oppression have their own unique characteristics, how they manifest, their unique histories. So I'm not trying to say that there's equivalence by any means. I think there are ways of comparing them and understanding them, and it's useful to sort of see the relationships between them. And I think as well, they are all kind of connected into the same system of oppression that oppresses people based on all different kinds of identities, race included, but also gender, sexual identity, orientation, immigration status, language ability, disability, inability, mental illness, all these different dimensions of identity.
Gotcha. But there's one problem with that, because, that whole bakery thing, they discriminated against a gay couple, which, it's whatever. Like, that's wrong. Shouldn't discriminate against anybody. But they discriminated against a gay couple. But, we're talking about cops shooting us in our back. That there's a system that will protect these abusers. You understand?
Let me see if I do understand you. To me, I think you're pointing out the extreme violence that the system is perpetrating against people of color and men of color. That includes police brutality and murder by the police. I think it's really, one of the main forms of societal oppression is racial, and the way, the system, commits violence against people of color through the police system. And I also think oppression can take a lot of different forms, including, this example of discrimination against a gay couple, or, discrimination against people in the workplace based on.
Check this out, because whenever people wanted to discriminate against us, it wasn't just one bakery, it wasn't just one workplace. It was multiple workplaces, multiple bakeries. You got to understand that. We couldn't go anywhere around any of these places. It'll be hard pressed for us to find one bakery that will even allow us in. We'll be hard pressed to find one job site that will at least allow us in. And you're talking about one bakery, and apparently that's the whole focus group right now for, gay people could get, are getting oppressed too. That's intersectionality, and we should all rally around that. You understand what I'm saying?
Maybe you could explain a little bit more, because you're talking about. I understand that you're talking about.
I'll explain right now. There was a few years ago. There was a study that came out saying if your name sounded black, the employer would tear up the application. Actually 2 years ago, there was another study that came out that said white high school dropouts earn more than black college graduates. So that's not intersectionality whatsoever. That's white supremacy. Because these white high school dropouts are gay and female and everything, but yet they earn more than black college graduates who are gay and who are women as well. So there's no such thing as intersectionality right there. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because back in the day, when we still now, it's not even back in the day. Still now, some people could still discriminate against us. I could walk into a store right now and somebody refuse to, give me services and goods. And that could happen in multiple stores, because, you know why? Because Latin people and black people don't own a lot of stuff around here. So that's what I'm saying. One gay couple just went to one bakery, and, it's not like they went to multiple. All right, one bakery refused them, but yet with us, it's a different story. You understand? So that's what I'm saying. It's not equivalent. And intersectionality right there takes a curveball.
You described some things about intersectionality, or your definitions of intersectionality, and I think maybe we can go back to that, because maybe I see intersectionality differently.
Well, I for what I've known and what I researched for intersectionality, I'm just using the basic definition, the working definition, is different people being oppressed in different levels. That's basically the layman's terms of it, right?
I think that's included, and I think that's one part of intersectionality. I also think for me, intersectionality means that, in a given situation, all of a person's identities are important for understanding who they are and their place in society. So it's important not to know only someone's race. It's also important to know what their gender is, and it's important to know what their sexual identity is and how that affects them in order to really understand what's going on in society. So that's another part of intersectionality, which I believe in.
Okay.
And I believe it's an important way of understanding things. So when anyone talks about a gay white person, or a white female, or a black man, there you're already talking about intersectionality, because you're talking about both gender and race. And if you leave out, one of those identities, if you only talk about white person, black person, you lose some of that understanding.
So how come the only people being propped up and actually being abused are the black people? Black people. They're the only ones being abused Black women also are being abused. Nobody's saying nothing, and these white women are walking around, harassing other people, and nothing happens to them. Everything's cool, but for some reason, the only ones being abused is these black people. So where is the intersectionality here? If is a black woman also being abused the same way?
I think there are a couple different points to make here. Is one, that you're pointing to this phenomenon that among any dimensions, other dimensions of identity, the people who are black people, people of color are always put behind white people or are discriminated against. So if you're talking about within, if you're talking about women, white women are discriminating against black women, and that's how racism works. So that's valid. I'm not going to disagree with any of that. I think what I also want to point out is that there is oppression of people based on their sexual identity. There are gay LGBT people being murdered, by heterosexual people, white cisgendered men murdering LGBT people based on their gender and sexual identity. So that's a real oppression that's happening. I think a lot of the oppression against black people, people of color, is really important, and it also is coexisting with oppression of people based on different other identities.
All I'm saying is that we have white supremacists, gay people like Milo Yiannopoulos. Are you familiar with him?
Sure. Yeah.
We have white supremacists like that representing the gay community, and he has the Gay for Trump campaign and slogan and everything.
Sure.
We got white supremacists like that talking about vile things about the black community, and
right.
We have people like Tomi Lahren. Are you familiar with her as well?
Yeah, I've seen some of her. Yeah.
Yeah, so she's out here, same thing, saying vile things about the black community. It's another white woman that actually made a YouTube video, actually I think a year ago, I believe, talking about the IQ in the black community. Doing all that white supremacist bullshit about IQs and stuff like that. So we have white supremacists in these communities. How is that intersectionality if white supremacy has intersected that? It's right there. White supremacy. There's no such thing as intersectionality. If white supremacy, let's say, okay, I'm going to give you intersectionality. Okay, there's intersectionality. White supremacy seeped into that. Now it's not intersectionality anymore. Now it's white supremacy. You understand? You got white supremacists out here targeting non-white people who are in these gay communities. Do you understand? So how is that, still, well, there's intersections and stuff like that. So how is that still the same thing?
Well, I see, I think I would agree that, white women kind of hide their racism behind the idea of feminism. So they use the gender, to kind of say, well, I'm a woman and I'm asserting my rights, and that kind of hides their oppression against black men or black people. So I think that's a very valid, concern. But I think one way of looking at that is to say that, they're trying to focus solely on gender and not including race. And so, and that's an example of not involving intersectionality or not looking at the different dimensions of identity.
But you got to include race into gender, don't you think?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's kind of my point with intersectionality, is that if you only focus on gender, you're missing that whole point about race. And so that's an incomplete description, and that results in racism and oppression. So if you kind of look at, an analogy with, race and another identity, if you're only focusing on race, you might miss particular important oppression based on gender or sexual orientation. Does that make sense?
No, it does. But my thing is, since since you make that point, yeah, that does make sense. I'm not gonna hold you against that. But there's also other things that we have to tackle. You understand?
Well, I want to say, I think maybe what you're pointing to is the kind of the primacy of race in all of these discussions, where there's a certain fundamentalness to race and how our society is organized, and that it kind of comes last in people's minds, where like people are more willing to maybe, in some situations, people are more willing to point out, protect white women rather than, black women or black men even. So I agree with that. I also just want to, I think it's important that we consider all these kinds of oppression and see how they all fit together.
Do you, by any chance, when I talk about white supremacy, there's this, I don't know if you know, there's this guy named Neely Fuller. Are you aware of him?
I'm not.
He's one of these old school cats. He broke down white supremacy being part of a system and working in codes. And part of that system and codes, he broke down into 9 parts. And these 9 parts is like the, how can I say it? Is like the creed of white supremacy. He said that white supremacy affects economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. So he pointed these 9 things out. These are 9 areas of activity between people that white supremacy affects. Okay. And he wrote this book, I believe, called the code, white supremacy something code construct. I'll look it up later. But he wrote this book, and he basically broke everything down. So when I see people using the term intersectionality and having these little definitions for it, for some reason I go back to the 9 areas of activity, and I look at it and say, wait a minute, this is still a form of white supremacy. You understand what I'm saying? So this is still a form of white supremacy. And the thing is that I always, to this day, I still do find that the word intersectionality is basically like a sugar-coated term just to not say white supremacy. Because I feel the way I've seen it go from a certain person use it to a whole race of people adopting that term with crazy ideologies. Mm-hmm. With crazy ideologies, for example, having things say like, you know, the men over here, men of color have more rights than, you know, women of color. You know what I'm saying? Or or crazy stuff like all men of color for some reason are more abusive to their partners than white men. You know what I'm saying? So crazy ideologies like that. And I want to know, just hearing this, I want to know your thoughts, and also, do you agree with some of that?
Well, I would agree definitely that, some people are using the term intersectionality to kind of hide their racism or hide their oppression. And they're kind of, in my opinion, misusing that term, intersectionality. At the same time, so I think when you're talking about the idea that, black men are more sexist than white men is, to me, totally false. At the same time, I do feel like there are ways in which, if you have multiple, maybe marginalized identities, I think there are ways in which black men can oppress black women. So sexual violence by black men against black women, or by, I identify as Asian, so, sexual violence of Asian men against Asian women is a real oppression, and that also needs to be addressed.
Wait, hold on. Let me just try to get this straight. You're saying that an oppression based on sexual violence, and just throw in let's say verbal abuse, right, is a form of oppression?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And so let me also, so we could have this clear. Being oppressed by an oppressor is a 24-hour thing, right? It's always constant, correct?
Yeah, I guess in our society, I would say in our society,
it's a 24-hour thing.
It's always happening. Yes, I agree with that.
Okay, it's a 24-hour thing. To escape my oppressor, let's just say back in slavery, to escape my oppressor, I'm gonna have to go to the moon just to do that, right? But
sure.
Still, in the end of the day, I still escape my oppressor. Now I'm not being oppressed anymore, correct?
Okay.
No, is that correct?
I mean, yeah, but right,
okay.
You can't really escape it, right? Yeah.
Okay, you can't really escape it. And
right.
Not only that, but the law protects you, the oppressor, from any legal actions whatsoever, correct?
Yeah, in a lot of cases, the law is, protects the oppressed.
How are black men oppressing black women by beating them if they go straight to jail right after that?
So we're focusing on the topic of, violence of black men against black women. And so I would say that, just like for, racial oppression, I think for sexism and gender oppression, that is also all pervasive. It's not so easy for women to remove themselves from violence against them. And so it's not the same as racial oppression. It takes different forms, but, patriarchy as a system is all pervasive in our society, just as racism is all pervasive. So, for example, there are women who are, women of color who experience sexual harassment, sexual assault by men of color who, don't feel empowered to really bring that up, or, they aren't able to sort of address those kinds of wrongs because of the way society is.
But you're right. But when they do, the oppressor who implemented that heinous crime gets arrested, correct?
I think that doesn't always happen.
That does always happen, especially when it comes to men of color. It always happens. It's to the point where the woman doesn't even have to get beat. An accusation needs to just come up here. It happens. But yeah, like, look at Bill Cosby. There was nothing proven with Bill Cosby. Am I saying that if he ever did rape somebody, should he? No, I'm not saying that. But if you're going to accuse somebody, at least have proof. 50-somewhat women came forward with multiple lies, and they got proven that they were lying. But yet, he still got found guilty. You know what I'm saying? But yet, look at all these other white men who did the same thing, but nothing's happening to them. The only one right now, it took them a year and a half, was Harvey Weinstein. It took them a year and a half to even make this guy walk into a police station, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? So where is the oppression from men of color? That doesn't exist right there, because they're being punished already.
Well, I would say, you bring up a good point in that, if you compare white men who are committing sexual violence and black men who are committing sexual violence, black men are punished more severely and white men are not being held accountable. And to me, I see that as example of racism. At the same time, I think there are instances of sexual violence against women of color by men of color that are not being punished, that are not being addressed.
I'm not saying it doesn't exist. There's sexual violence all over. There's verbal abusive violence between partners all over. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. But my main thing is, whenever people do talk about intersectionality, they always have this demonizing ideology about men of color. For some reason, they do a lot more violence against women than any other group, which simply isn't true. And my main thing also is that they rather, deal with a white person than deal with a man of color, because according to them, they feel more safe. You know what I'm saying? So
I totally agree with that. Men of color are demonized and characterized and stereotyped as being more violent, being more dangerous, and that's definitely a racist perception, because white men are very dangerous and can be very dangerous in certain contexts. And really, yeah, it's that black or men of color are easier to kind of scapegoat and condemn than white men, and so I fully agree with that.
Gotcha. Okay, so you do agree that so you basically just agree that there's no oppression between men of color that is comparable to other forms of oppression.
Well, I think the way black men are treated and white men are treated is that difference is racism. But I do think I think it is also, we need to be careful not to compare oppressions, or at least we need to see kind of all these different oppressions as part of the same system. So in other words, it's not, hopefully, although this is how it's portrayed by a lot of people, it's not like my gender against your race competing, but rather, the oppression of women and the oppression of people of color are part of this greater system of overall oppression.
Now I got a question, another question for you.
Sure.
Part of intersectionality is fighting for everybody's oppression, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Fighting for everybody's oppression. Okay.
Well, yeah.
Okay, so why should us, black folks, why should we fight for the oppression of white women or gay white men? Why should we do that?
I mean, I think that's a good question. I think one is to think about what's the underlying principle about why we want to undo oppression. And to me, the idea is that we need to have a fundamental respect for people, regardless of their, race or sexual orientation. Fundamental respect for human dignity. Fairness, right?
The thing is that white women have never, ever, ever fought for black folks, ever. Neither did gay white men. So why should black folks go and risk their lives and fight for their oppression?
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're saying is true on the whole. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's more about, where does the responsibility lie? Like, we can't really ask black people to really fight for white people when white people have not been supporting black people on the whole. So there's more responsibility that lies on, white people, white men to kind of support white women. At the same time, if black people are not fighting for, let's say, LGBT rights, well, there are black people who are identified as LGBT, right? So if black people are not fighting for those rights, are they really fighting for all black people, right?
Well, no, not really. The reason why is because a black gay person is still black first. That's how white supremacy works. A white woman is white first. She's a woman second. A gay white man is white first. He's gay second. So either way, a gay black guy who's choosing not to fight for the gay struggle with white people isn't going to get affected whatsoever if he just stays out of it and stays with black people and say, no, we're going to fight for our rights first, and then I'll fight for gay rights second. They're not going to get affected because either way, we all get treated the same.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that. Let me just approach it from a different way, and let's take the example of black feminism. So based on my admittedly limited understanding of black feminism, black feminism in some part arose because the feminist movement was particularly a white feminist movement. And so I don't think so. And at the same time, black women were recognizing that the, black civil rights movement, the black power movement, was also not necessarily listening to black women's voices. And so...
Wrong. You gotta do your research, brother. You gotta do your research, bro. That's completely wrong. That's what white feminists tell you. That's completely wrong. That's not true. What ended up happening was, out of the backs of the civil rights movement, the white feminist movement started. Let's keep it funky, That's how it started. Right out of the backs of the civil rights movement. So white women were trying to get rights and trying to do everything, do this and do that, equal pay, whatever, right? And they were falling in line with all these other racist, white supremacist feminists, all the way from the antebellum slavery all the way till, the 60s. They had this whole ideology. Are you following me? This whole ideology. Now, the thing is, they needed numbers. That's what the problem was. They needed numbers. And they said, you know what? Who has the biggest numbers? Black people. Black people overturn elections with their votes. Come on, Black people are the biggest numbers. Let's tell those black women that they're being oppressed too. Because the civil rights movement was fighting for black people, not just black men. They were fighting for black people all over. All over. The thing is that most of the civil rights struggles, that they were getting, dogs sicked on them or whatever, men were telling the women to stay home because they don't want to get them hurt. You know what I mean? But the women wanted to fight. That's the only difference, that men said, listen, just stay home. I don't want you to do it, blah, 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 blah. But the thing is, right when the white feminists said, you know what, we need numbers, that's when they started feeding black women that BS, saying that, listen, you don't need no man, you're independent, this and this and this and this and this and this and this. That's why nowadays you only hear black women talking about, I'm independent, I don't need no man. You don't hear white women saying that.
I do, but I think that's like beside the point, maybe.
Yeah, but my point is that white feminists used black women as their numbers to get them in to their rallying, in their cause. And once they got them in their cause, they never fought for black women's rights whatsoever. They did it under the guise of women, but all those benefits are going to white women.
I'm less familiar with that kind of perspective on the feminist movement. I think I'm primarily kind of the best I can citing the works of Angela Davis and Bell Hooks, and particularly there's a statement by the Combahee River Collective.
What about Susan B. Anthony?
Susan B. Anthony. So Susan B. Anthony is a white woman, right? So she is part of this kind of white feminism movement. I think
she was somewhat the co-founder.
I guess she's definitely a founder of the feminist movement, and in that particular context, it was a particularly white feminist movement. I think it's a little bit. To say that white women fed to black women this idea is maybe not, not acknowledging the intellect and power of black women, and their ability to conduct their own analysis of the situation and put forth their own ideas. So I feel like writers like Angela Davis, Bell Hooks, were really seeing the situation and voicing their concerns with the white feminist movement, voicing their concerns with Black Power movement, civil rights movement, in order to have the voices of black women heard.
What did Bell Hooks? What book did she write?
So she's written quite a few books, but the particular book is that I'm familiar with is called Feminism from Margin to Center, I think it's called.
I think she write something like black women. It was something crazy. It was, I think, I believe, was it her first book? I believe it was her first. I don't know what it was, but I remember that she tackled male patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
and she only focused on black men and nothing about white men whatsoever. She just focused on black men, black men, black men, black men. And for some reason, these black feminists have these, white supremacist ideologies as well, because they look at men of color as something evil or something vile, and the same way how white supremacy looks at men of color. Do you agree with that?
That's kind of not my reading of at least the black feminist authors that I've read. But maybe I'm missing something there. But I think it's to me, they're really saying like, black women do support black men and have supported the civil rights movement. And I think there's a way in which, these movements can also address the oppressions of women, particularly black women. And that's where I feel like that intersectionality comes in, where when you're addressing, you can address, the rights of women, the rights of black people, the rights of people of color, both at the same time, and address all of these kind of oppressions together, rather than having them compete against one another.
But for some reason, I believe Bell Hooks, I remember reading one of her books. She just shitted on black men, but that's besides the point. We pretty much been talking for 48 minutes now. I got, so far, what do you feel about the discussion?
Yeah, I think it's been a good discussion. I really appreciate the points that you're making. I definitely have to look up the work by Neely Fuller. I see we still don't agree on everything, but that's okay.
Well, that's the whole point of a discussion. We
Right.
don't have to agree on everything. This wasn't a debate whatsoever. It
Right.
was just a discussion. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It was a very respectful discussion, and I tip my hat off to you. All right, Kev, right? Kevin?
Yeah.
All right, Kevin. Kevin, listen, been a pleasure. Let's stay in touch, and I really want to have future discussions with you.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for having a conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Okay, take care.
Okay, guys, that was the discussion phone interview with the listener, Kevin. And again, if you guys want to leave a voicemail for the show, the number for that is 609-948-4194. You could leave a voicemail and I'll start playing it on future episodes. Again, if you guys feel like having a discussion with me, let me know. Hit me up just like Kevin did, and we could go and chop it up. I appreciate for all the listeners. I hope you guys like the content. You could reach me at Instagram and Twitter at radical_Latino_. And again, the phone number for the show is 609-948-4194. Have a good one, guys. Peace.